The Christmas lights blinked in synchronized rhythm with the cold silence that crushed the massive dining room of Stonebrook Hall. Outside, snow fell in perfect flakes against the Gothic windows, but inside, the warmth of the holiday had turned to ice. I sat near the head of the mahogany table, listening as my father, Richard Vance, raised his crystal glass. The silver caught the candlelight, casting shadows across his handsome, calculated face. He was usually charming, that was part of his gift as a financier, but tonight his eyes were hard and cold as January steel. He looked directly at me. "To the new year," he announced, his voice smooth as bourbon. "And to fewer burdens." The room stilled. My mother, Diana, set down her fork with deliberate care. My brother Leo smirked into his wine glass. "Serena," Richard continued, "this house is selling next month. The closing is final. Your sentimental nonsense, your endless research, your obsession with restoration, is complicating the sale. It's making the property harder to market. Frankly, you're a financial drain we can no longer afford. You can't live with us anymore." The words landed like stones. I felt the blood drain from my face, felt my hands begin to tremble beneath the antique lace tablecloth my mother had ironed that morning. "Richard," Diana whispered, but her voice carried no real objection. She was recovering from a serious illness, her strength still fractured. She wouldn't fight him. She never did. Leo, my younger brother, the entitled, perpetually failing venture capitalist, gave me a look of pure triumph. He'd always resented that I was father's favorite, back when father bothered to have favorites. Now I understood, I'd become something worse than replaceable. I'd become inconvenient. "You have until tomorrow," Richard said, returning to his Dover soul as if he'd just commented on the weather. "Pack what you need. Take your sentimentality with you." I stood up slowly. My antique chair scraped loudly against the polished hardwood, a sound like a scream muffled by civilization. I looked at my father, letting him see the shock in my eyes. I refused to give him my tears. "Not yet." "I understand, Richard," I said, using his first name deliberately, a small rebellion, but a rebellion nonetheless. "I'll be gone before sunrise." I didn't wait for his response. I walked out of that dining room, past the Christmas tree my hands had decorated, past the stockings I'd hung with such hope just days before. The smell of pine and baked ham that I'd always loved suddenly tasted like ash and betrayal. Let me back up. Let me tell you who I am. My name is Serena Vance, and I am 25 years old. But more importantly, I am someone who was raised to believe that love meant sacrifice. 10 years ago, when I was 15 and my mother had just been diagnosed with her first major health crisis, my father Richard decided that Stonebrook Hall, our historic family estate, needed to be maintained and restored. The problem was, he had no intention of paying for it. Stonebrook Hall is a Gothic revival mansion built in 1887 by a railroad magnate named Cornelius Webb. It sits on 40 acres of grounds just outside a small university town, and it is the most beautiful, complicated, heartbreaking place I've ever known. My father acquired it through a real estate deal when I was 5. He saw it as an investment, a symbol of his success, nothing more. The house was always just a thing to him, like a car or a painting. Something that increased in value or decreased depending on the market. But I fell in love with it the day we moved in. I loved the secret passages behind the library shelves. I loved the hand-carved crown molding that took some long-dead artisan weeks to complete. I loved the creaking floorboards that told the story of over a century of footsteps. I loved the ballroom where orchestras had once played, and the kitchen gardens where someone's great-grandmother had grown roses. When my mother got sick, I was supposed to go to architecture school. I had my acceptance letter to Berkeley. I had a full academic scholarship. I had my entire future mapped out in beautiful, ambitious detail. But my father said the house needed me more. At first, it was just for a semester. Just while mother recovered. Just until she was strong enough to manage the household staff. Except mother never fully recovered. And my father, in his careful, narcissistic way, made it clear that my presence was the only thing keeping the household functioning. He called it your responsibility to the family. He called my sacrifice character building. He called my dreams impractical nonsense. I declined Berkeley. I used my $80,000 college fund, money my grandmother had left me, to hire a structural engineer. Then I spent the next decade teaching myself everything about historical preservation, architectural restoration, forensic accounting, and property law. I needed to understand the house to save it. And in saving the house, I lost myself. Every penny I earned from part-time jobs went into restoration. Every hour not spent sleeping or eating went into research. I hand-catalogued the library's first editions. I found the original blueprints in the county archive and spent 2 weeks photographing every page. I researched the original owners, documented their lives, traced their bloodlines. I painstakingly matched original hardware, tracked down replacement tiles that matched the 1920s renovations, and negotiated with artisans who could repair the plasterwork without destroying the historical integrity. And my father called it playing house. He would walk through the halls I had brought back from decay, and critique my work. "It's taking too long," he'd say. Or, "This restoration is too expensive." Or my personal favorite, "Why do you care so much about dead people's decisions? It's just a building." But I knew the truth. I knew why he needed the house to look valuable. I just didn't understand how desperate he'd become. Upstairs in my small, cold room on the 3rd floor, I packed quickly that Christmas night. My room had never been meant for long-term occupation. It was originally a servant's quarters, small windows, low ceilings, walls painted institutional beige. I'd never redecorated it, never made it mine. Somehow, I'd always known my time here would end. I'd been waiting for the rejection without admitting I was waiting. I took only what mattered, my clothes, my old laptop held together with duct tape, and the object that contained everything. My leather-bound master research journal for Stonebrook Hall. This journal was massive, easily 600 pages of dense documentation. It contained every fact I'd uncovered about the house over 10 years. Measurements of every room. Photographs of original details. Historical records. Property surveys. The names and dates of every worker who'd built it. The genealogies of every family who'd lived here. I'd even documented the restoration work I'd done, with before and after photographs and detailed notes on materials used. This journal was my life's work. It was my love letter to the house, written in meticulous detail across a decade. As I slid the heavy book into my backpack, I felt that familiar pang of guilt. My mother was downstairs, still fragile, still recovering. She would need care. Who would make sure she took her medications? Who would help her to the gardens on the good days? But I couldn't stay. I couldn't watch my father dismantle this house for profit. And I couldn't watch myself disappear completely in the process. The next morning, I was gone before the sun touched the horizon. I drove to Millbrook, the small university town where I'd originally planned to study architecture. I rented a tiny, cheap room in a boarding house run by an elderly woman named Mrs. Chun. The room smelled like decades of other people's lives, and the radiator clanked all night, but it was mine. The rent was $400 a month, and Mrs. Chun didn't ask questions. I was homeless and penniless and terrified. But I was free. That afternoon, as I was unpacking my few belongings, there was a knock on my door. "Package for you," Mrs. Chun called. I stared at the heavy manila envelope in confusion. I'd given no one this address except my mother, and she would never betray my father's authority. It wasn't from Richard. It was from Leo. Inside the envelope was a surveillance photograph, grainy but clear enough. It showed Leo, wearing surgical gloves, sneaking into the main library of Stonebrook Hall late at night. The timestamp read 2:47 a.m., 3 days before I left. Behind that photograph was a file. A thick file. I sat on the edge of Mrs. Chen's spare bed and read through it with a growing sense of unreality. The file contained photocopies of loan documents. Forged loan documents. They all bore my signature, or a very good forgery of it. They detailed equipment purchases, contractor payments, restoration expenses totaling over $300,000. The documents were dated retroactively over the past 3 years. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the pages. The cover letter was written in Leo's careless handwriting, "Insurance. If anyone asks about the missing funds, these prove it was you. Keep quiet, or we use them. I stopped breathing. It took me several minutes to understand what I was looking at. Leo had embezzled funds. Significant funds. He'd been using Richard's investment firm's accounts to cover massive losses from his failed business ventures. The forensic accountant in me, the part of me that had taught itself to track historical restoration expenses, immediately recognized the pattern. 3 shell companies. Multiple wire transfers. Professional-grade money laundering. And now Leo was preparing to blame me. He was going to plant these forged documents in my old room. He was going to claim that I'd been stealing from the family for years. He was going to tell the authorities that I was the unstable, resentful daughter who'd had full access to the house and the connections to execute sophisticated financial fraud. Why? Because I had just become the perfect scapegoat. I was newly homeless. I'd been publicly humiliated at Christmas dinner. I had motive, resentment, and opportunity, 10 years of access. And I had no one to vouch for me except a mother who was too weak to stand against my father, and a father who had just thrown me out. The depth of their wickedness made me dizzy. I wasn't just a burden. I was their designated fall guy. I spent that night on Mrs. Chen's lumpy bed, staring at the water stain on the ceiling, and something changed inside me. For 10 years, I had accepted my father's narrative. I was the responsible one. I was the caretaker. I was the one who sacrificed. I was the burden who stayed behind to maintain a house that nobody else cared about. But looking at those forged documents, I realized something else. I had been underestimated. For a decade, my father had dismissed me as naive. My family had treated me as invisible. They'd called my skills side hobbies. They'd mocked my research as sentimental nonsense. They'd viewed me as weak because I was quiet, because I was obedient, because I loved them. But here's what they didn't understand. I had spent 10 years learning to read the truth. I could trace the lineage of a house through its architecture. I could spot forged documents by the inconsistency in digital signatures. I could follow money through shell companies like a thread through a maze. And I was furious. Not the hot, explosive fury that fades quickly. The cold, crystalline fury of someone who sees clearly for the first time. I pulled out my old laptop, the one held together with duct tape, and I went to work. I started with what I knew. Leo's most recent failed venture was a real estate development firm called Crescent Properties. It had collapsed 2 years ago, leaving Richard to cover losses of approximately $2.3 million. I obtained what public records were available. I cross-referenced them with the digital signatures on the forged documents they'd tried to plant on me. The patterns were identical. Leo's favorite shell company was called Meridian Holdings, and it had been used to funnel funds from Richard's investment firm directly into Crescent Properties. But here's the crucial part. Richard wasn't just enabling Leo's fraud. Richard was knowingly participating in it. The evidence was there, buried in the legitimate documents, hidden in plain sight. My father had been using profits from legitimate deals to cover his son's criminal losses. And now, with Stonebrook Hall's sale, he planned to have one final massive payday to clean up all the loose ends. The sale would fund Leo's embezzled debts, eliminate any trace of fraud, and, by removing me, eliminate the one person who might actually understand what had happened. It was elegant and calculated and deeply, fundamentally evil. I sat in that cramped room in Mrs. Chen's boarding house, and I made a decision. I wasn't going to run. I wasn't going to hide. And I sure as hell wasn't going to let them make me the fall guy for their crimes. I was going to stop them. But I needed leverage. I had the forensic accounting evidence, but that took time to compile. I had the forged documents they'd sent me, but that was just a threat. What I needed was something that would stop the sale immediately. Something permanent. Something they couldn't work around or buy their way out of. I needed to go back to what I knew better than anyone on this earth, Stonebrook Hall itself. I opened my master research journal and began turning through the pages methodically. Every floor plan, every survey, every piece of documentation I'd painstakingly gathered over a decade. And then I found it. Tucked into the back pages was a photocopy of a map I'd discovered years ago, hidden in the chimney during a restoration project. It was a land survey map from 1947, yellowed fragile, marked with handwritten notations in faded fountain pen. I had digitized it 3 years ago as part of my cataloging project, then filed it away without fully understanding its significance. Now I pulled up the digital image on my laptop and magnified it. My hands started shaking. A small area near the west wing of Stonebrook Hall was marked with an obscure legal code, IBG 1923 Federal. Restricted. IBG Indigenous Burial Ground. Federal. Restricted. I grabbed my notebook and began cross-referencing local historical laws. I went through county records, state archives, federal databases. I searched through university historical collections and archaeological reports. And slowly, the truth emerged. In 1923, decades before the Vance family purchased the property, the land had been officially designated as a protected indigenous burial site. The designation had never been lifted. It had simply been forgotten, buried under decades of property transfers, lost in the shuffle of legal documents, erased by time and bureaucratic inefficiency. But the law was still the law. If that designation was officially filed with the Federal Historic Preservation Office, if it was placed on the National Register of Historic Places, then the property would immediately trigger a massive federal land use violation. The sale would be frozen instantly. The property valuation would drop to near zero. Richard and the buyers would face colossal legal fines, potential criminal charges, and years of litigation. Richard's fast, clean cash sale would become a financial nightmare. And there was nothing he could do about it. You can't negotiate with federal law. You can't charm it or pay it off. You can't make it disappear. This was perfect. I needed official verification, and I needed it without alerting Richard's team of lawyers. I reached out to Dr. Elara Mitchell, a professor I'd known from my pre-architecture days at Millbrook University. Dr. Elara was a specialist in local history and preservation law, exactly the kind of person who would recognize the significance of what I'd found. I didn't tell her the family details. I didn't mention my father or the sale or the embezzlement. I simply told her that I'd discovered a significant historical oversight regarding Stonebrook Hall, and I had meticulously documented evidence to support it. When I showed her the survey map, the photographs of the burial site, the historical records I'd compiled, her eyes widened. "Serena," she said slowly, "do you understand what this means? It means the property is legally protected. It means," she continued, "that someone knew this when they sold it to your father, and they didn't disclose it. It means your father has been building and developing on a federally protected site for over 20 years. It means," she looked at me carefully, "it means there's going to be significant legal exposure for whoever owns it. Can you help me file the necessary paperwork?" Dr. Elara studied my face for a long moment. She was too intelligent not to understand that this wasn't just academic. But she was also too ethical to ask questions I wasn't offering answers to. "Yes," she said finally. "I can help you." While I was gathering evidence, Leo's fear was becoming increasingly visible. He called my phone constantly, leaving messages that shifted between threats and pleading. "Stop hiding, Serena. You know what happens if you don't cooperate. We can make this easy, or we can make it very difficult." I knew what he was doing. He was terrified that his embezzlement was about to be exposed. And he was still actively trying to frame me before the closing, still trying to plant evidence that would make me the fall guy. The pressure was mounting. According to the information I'd gathered, Richard's investment partners had discovered Leo's fraud. They were demanding repayment by the end of the month. The sale of Stonebrook Hall was the only thing standing between my father and financial ruin. He was desperate. Then came the text message. It arrived on my phone at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. No caller ID, just an unknown number. Check the 1965 deed. Section M. Look for rights. D. My mother. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. Diana had never directly defied my father. She was too afraid, too broken down by years of emotional manipulation. But this? This was Diana, moving carefully and strategically, leaving breadcrumbs for me to follow. Using my old university access, I located the 1965 deed for Stonebrook Hall in the County Records Office Digital Archive. The deed was complex, 23 pages of dense legal language. I focused on Section M, reading through clause after clause of property rights and restrictions. And then I saw it. The language was archaic and intentionally obscured, but the meaning was unmistakable. Richard did not own the subsurface mineral rights beneath Stonebrook Hall. Those rights belonged to a trust. A trust managed by Diana Vance. My mother. My weak, helpless mother who'd spent years married to a narcissist. My mother who'd had to drop out of law school to support my father's career ambitions. My mother who everyone dismissed as a victim. My mother had been the ultimate owner of the land's real value all along. Richard couldn't sell Stonebrook Hall for its intended, highly lucrative development price without Diana's signature on the mineral rights transfer. The sale was already technically illegal. And Diana, through anonymous texts and careful guidance, was helping me understand that she had been subtly fighting back for years. She had been waiting for someone strong enough to finish what she couldn't start. I had my leverage. I had the burial ground designation. I had Diana's mineral rights. I had Leo's embezzled funds. Now I needed to execute the final move. I spent the next week compiling everything into one comprehensive forensic accounting document. I traced every wire transfer, every shell company, every forged signature. I created a timeline showing how funds had been diverted from Richard's legitimate investment firm into Leo's failed ventures. I documented Richard's knowledge and participation, the deliberate, calculated decision to cover Leo's crimes using firm money. It was airtight. It was irrefutable. And it was anonymous. I packaged it carefully, ensuring there was no way to trace it back to me, and sent it to the IRS Fraud Division with a cover letter explaining that I had discovered evidence of systematic embezzlement and money laundering involving Richard Vance's investment firm. Then I waited. I also called my mother. It was the first time I'd spoken to her since I left. Serena. Her voice was fragile, surprised. Hi, Mom. Are you safe? Are you? She stopped, and I could hear her glancing over her shoulder, making sure my father couldn't hear. I'm safe, I told her. I'm in Millbrook. I'm okay. Your father is. He's been terrible since you left. He's angry all the time. Leo is nervous. He keeps saying you're going to. She stopped again. Mom, I need you to listen to me. I'm going to file some documents that will protect Stonebrook Hall forever. The sale is going to fall apart. There are going to be legal complications. Richard and Leo might face charges. I need you to be ready for that. There was a long silence. The house, she whispered. Serena, I always knew you were the only one who truly loved it. You were the only one who saw its value as something more than money. I'm going to protect it, I promised. Then protect yourself too, she said. The closing was scheduled for Friday, December 27th. It was meant to be the final step, Richard signing away Stonebrook Hall to a developer who would strip it of its historical significance and turn it into luxury condominiums. Richard and Leo were at the downtown office with the buyers and their lawyers. They were minutes away from signing the final papers. They were minutes away from securing the sale money that would cover Leo's embezzlement and save Richard's reputation. But at 2:47 p.m., the exact same time Leo had been caught on that surveillance photograph, my phone buzzed. It was a news alert from the County Historical Society. Federal Historic Preservation Office files emergency designation on Stonebrook Hall. Dr. Alara and I had filed the paperwork that morning. At 2:49 p.m., the closing attorney received a federal electronic notification. It was official. Stonebrook Hall was now under federal land use restriction due to undisclosed indigenous burial sites on the property. The sale was frozen pending a federal investigation. I can only imagine the scene that followed. The silence in that downtown office. Richard's face going pale. Leo's understanding that something had gone catastrophically wrong. The closing attorney's professional voice explaining that the deal was dead. That the property couldn't be sold until the federal violation was resolved. That years of litigation would follow. According to news reports I found later, Richard screamed at the attorney, "What is this? It must be that damn girl." Even now, reading those words, I feel a strange kind of satisfaction. He understood immediately. He knew exactly who had done this to him. Then his phone rang. It was the IRS Fraud Division, following up on the anonymous tip I'd sent them. They had preliminary findings and wanted to schedule an interview regarding significant irregularities in his investment firm's accounts. Richard's world collapsed in that moment. Not dramatically, not violently, but completely, catastrophically. The next 6 months were chaotic. Richard was arrested on federal charges related to wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. Leo, who'd been actively embezzling, faced separate charges. Their investment firm was investigated and ultimately shut down. Multiple lawsuits were filed by clients who'd lost money through their fraudulent schemes. My mother, protected by her mineral rights ownership and by the federal investigation, was advised by the court-appointed receiver to hold onto the property rather than sell. The house that had nearly destroyed us was now our only asset, and our only protection. The media picked up the story. "Buried Secrets at Historic Estate" was the headline. "Federal Investigation Uncovers Decades-Long Fraud" was another. Nobody knew the real story. Nobody knew that a young woman living in a boarding house had single-handedly brought down a corrupt financier and his son. The narrative stayed focused on the federal violation, the archaeological significance, the legal failures. My name was barely mentioned. I didn't care. I didn't need credit. I needed something else entirely. 3 months after the freeze, my mother called me. "Serena, the federal receiver is asking what I want to do with the property. They're saying that given the circumstances, given my ownership of the mineral rights and the historical significance, I could make a case for maintaining the house in its current state." "What do you want to do?" I asked. There was a pause. "What do you want to do?" "I want to restore it," I said. "I want to do it properly. I want to preserve it for real this time, not for resale, not for profit, but because it's beautiful and it matters." "Then come home," my mother said simply. "Come home and do what you were meant to do." I moved back to Stonebrook Hall on a Monday in April. The house was different with my father gone. The oppressive weight of his presence had lifted. The air didn't feel like it was suffocating me. My mother had begun reclaiming the spaces she'd surrendered to him years ago. And I began the real work. With the property now protected by federal designation, I could apply for historical preservation grants. I could work with legitimate contractors. I could pursue my architectural education through online programs while working on the restoration. What had been impossible under my father's dismissive, greedy regime became suddenly, miraculously possible. My mother and I hired Dr. Ilara as a consultant. We mapped out a comprehensive restoration plan. We documented the burial ground with appropriate cultural sensitivity and archaeological expertise. We began the process of turning Stonebrook Hall into a proper historical site. Not a commercial development, but a genuine preservation. It would take years. But for the first time, I felt like the work mattered in a way beyond my own obsession. 6 months after my return, I received a visitor. It was Leo. He was out on bail pending trial, required to stay within the county. He was thin and haggard, nothing like the smug young man who'd tried to frame me. I almost didn't let him in. But something made me open the door. "I wanted you to know," he said without preamble, "that I'm taking a plea deal. I'm confessing to the embezzlement. I'm testifying against Dad about his knowledge and participation." I said nothing. "You destroyed us," he continued. "You were supposed to be the fall guy, and instead you played chess while we were playing checkers." "I didn't destroy you," I said quietly. "You did that yourselves. I just made sure you couldn't destroy me in the process." He nodded like he understood. Maybe he did. "The house," he said. "You really love it that much?" "Yes," I said. "I always have." "Weird," he said, and then he left. Here's what people don't understand about revenge. Real revenge isn't about destruction. It's not about making someone suffer the way they made you suffer. That's just pain echoing pain, violence echoing violence. Real revenge is about building something better from the ruins of what tried to destroy you. I was the burden who got thrown out at Christmas dinner. I was the one my family dismissed as weak, as naive, as too sentimental about a house that was just a building. But I was also the one who paid attention. I was the one who learned. I was the one who documented everything. I was the one who understood that knowledge is power, and that sometimes the most powerful tool you have is the truth. I didn't need to confront them. I didn't need to yell or cry or demand recognition. I just needed to know my value and trust that the truth would ultimately matter. Stonebrook Hall is being restored properly now. Legitimately. Beautifully. Not for profit, but for preservation. My mother and I are working together. Really together, not through dysfunction and guilt, but through genuine partnership and love. The federal designation will protect the burial ground. The historical significance will protect the architecture. The mineral rights will protect my mother. And I'm finally free to do what I was always meant to do: preserve beauty, honor history, and create something that will outlast all of us. My father sits in a federal prison now, his reputation destroyed, his empire collapsed. Leo will likely follow him there. Their names are synonymous with corruption and fraud. They are what happens to greed unchecked and empathy erased. But me? I'm the girl who walked away from everything and came back with everything. I'm the burden who became the victor. I'm the one who chose beauty over bitterness, knowledge over revenge, and preservation over destruction. And every single day, when I walk through the halls of Stonebrook Hall, I know that I made the right choice. The house saved me. And I saved the house. That's the real story. If you've made it this far, you understand, respect is non-negotiable. My worth wasn't defined by my father calling me a burden or Leo trying to frame me. My story proves that silence can be a weapon, and patience, the decade I spent researching Stonebrook Hall's true history, can be absolute power. If this resonated with you, if a narcissistic family has publicly sold off your life's work, tell them this: your silence doesn't make you weak. Your boundaries don't make you difficult. Your survival makes you extraordinary. My sentimental nonsense became the federal land use violation that saved the house. The revolution happens when you decide to write your own ending. They thought I was a financial drain. I became the reason their entire scheme crumbled. Share your story below, and don't forget to like and subscribe.